Hello, wild people. I'm out here on a hiking solo, and I'm trying to find that one piece of essential gear you need to take with you when you go solo hiking or backpacking. Let's see. Food? No, that's not it. Water? No, it's kind of important, but let's see. Toilet paper? That's closer. Oh, wait a minute. Here it is. Here it is. My teddy bear. What else am I going to hug when I hear the wolves howl and the bears scratching at my tent, except Teddy here? So during the summer, I hiked about 200 miles of the PCT alone after my son got off the trail to go back to college, and Flash decided to get off because it was getting a little too hot for burn. So near Callahan's, going south, I struck out alone on the trail. And I discovered it was a different kind of experience than hiking together as a team. I realized I'd have to hike differently and think differently. So let's go back to the studio, and I can tell you a little bit about what I learned. Well, thank you for tuning in to AK Wild One. So my first recommendation, if you're going to go backpacking solo, is before you strike out for the great unknown alone, have a good deal of experience hiking with others. I know there have been some successful backpackers who never backpacked a day in their life and who decided to hit the trail solo. But I think before you set off solo, you should have gone on a variety of backpacking trips with others, so you kind of have a sense of the risks you might face, and also you have a strong competence baseline. Tip number 2 is plan your hike as if your cell phone doesn't work and you don't have an Inreach, although I recommend you carry both. I say this for 2 reasons. You might lose your Inreach, or your cell phone might fail, and you might have to use a compass in case you get lost. So having a strong sense of your location, the trail route, along with its water sources, the ascents and descents, is good to know in case the technology fails. So before you head out, let's say you're going to hike a 60-mile section, write out some notes about the hazards you might encounter along the way, the sections with the steep elevation gains or descents, and the water sources. This way, if your technology fails, such as your connection with the trail app far out, at least you'll have a strong sense of the country you're hiking through. Also, sometimes we depend on our technology too much as a crutch. We think it will always get us through risky situations, so we push the risk. Years ago, when I cross-country skied the backcountry in Utah, I noticed that people who carried avalanche transceivers were more likely to push the envelope and ski more dangerous slopes, and therefore more likely to enter an avalanche zone area rather than try to avoid it. The problem with this thinking is, if you get buried by an avalanche, your chances of dying are pretty high, regardless of whether or not you're wearing an avalanche beacon. So bring technology, but be prepared in case it fails. Tip number 3, it's important to hike more cautiously, to think about everything that could possibly go wrong and then plan accordingly. Make a mental list of everything that could go wrong, including falls, twisted ankles, snake bites, water shortages, etc., and have a plan for how you would respond. A Yupik hunter one time gave me some critical advice years ago that I still practice. It's don't follow your first thought. Don't act rashly, and do what you can to dial back the risk. When hiking a long-distance hike, that means crossing blowdowns more carefully, analyzing river crossings more carefully, and paying closer attention to foot placement on the trail. It means to hike deliberately. This is not a time to go into your Zen mode. Check your map or far out often when you come to trail forks to ensure you stay on the right trail. You also have to be a little more OCD when hiking solo. Tip number 4. Be more alert, deliberative, paranoid, etc. of natural hazards. For example, in Northern California, if you camp near water sources, that's also a good place where bears will hang out in the summer. Just be aware of that. Also, in the desert, pay attention when you are setting up your tent by looking for cacti thorns, scorpions, and rattlesnakes before unloading your gear. Okay, tip number 5. Have a ritual for every time you stop and get up so you don't lose anything. For example, after I stop and then get up, I check to make sure I have all my critical items, such as my camera, my water filter, Inreach, and then with my trekking poles held out in front of me, I make a 360 with my poles to survey the ground. That way I can make sure that I haven't left anything on the ground, and I also make sure I've got my trekking poles. Okay, tip number 6, keep your Inreach in a prominent place. Make sure this is a priority piece of equipment. Handle and treat it carefully. Now make sure also that you use your Inreach to check in with someone at least once a day and let them know your position and where you intend to camp. Tip number 7, know thyself. Know your blind spots or your weaknesses and be sure to compensate for them. So my hearing is not too good, so I must be alert to rattlesnakes. On the other hand, I'm pretty good at spotting animals and noticing little things on the trails, so I take this trait to the next level. This summer, I did not see or hear any rattlesnakes during part 2 of my PCT adventure until the last day in Northern California when a medium-sized rattlesnake scurried, or slithered I should say, across the trail. The good news was the snake did not surprise me. I had been anticipating a rattlesnake encounter. Okay, tip number 8, know first aid and how you'll treat sprained ankles, tick bites, blisters, and abrasions, etc. You'll have to take care of yourself if you have an injury. It's also a good idea to recognize the signs and symptoms of hypothermia, altitude sickness, and heat exhaustion or heat stroke. You should also have a plan for how you intend to treat these conditions. Tip number 9, choose your water sources very carefully. Practice also excellent hygiene. Realize that the norovirus is real and many hikers have been sickened by it during their treks. So you need to practice good hygiene and wash your hands often, as you should, even when you're hiking with others. I carry a little more water when hiking solo, and I always stop at a strong, clean flowing water source, even if I only need to fill up a liter. This summer, I decided to carry at least 3 liters of water, even if the map identified water sources more frequently. This gave me the luxury of passing places where the water looked marginal. Tip number 10, if the situation requires you to camp near others, be sure to size up the demeanor of your possible campmates. Try to camp near people who are friendly and compatible with your style of backpacking. I strive really hard to maintain goodwill on the trail. I know what it's like to come to a campground late at night when you're exhausted from a long day of hiking. And so I always say to backpackers, you're welcome to camp here. I'm old and harmless. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the peculiar risks female hikers face when hiking solo. I know there are creepy, badly behaved male hikers out there, but I probably can't speak to the best methods for minimizing the peculiar risks solo female hikers face. So please feel free to share your ideas in the comments. Well, I hope you can see these tips are helpful whether you hike solo or with a group. Most of what I've mentioned is common sense. I think a lot of what I've said boils down to having humility in the outdoors, a quiet recognition that things could go wrong, and you just need to be prepared. You know, the desire to live a self-reliant experience is firmly fixed in our cultural psyche, and hiking solo has many benefits. Primarily, it provides you with the opportunity to focus on your own thoughts and bring clarity to your life. Well, thank you for tuning in, wild people. Until we meet again, live wildly, my friends.